Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is one of those jobs that I actually rather love because it marks a shift in the season that is all part of a bigger picture that can be and should be really beautiful. Because this long grass in the cricket pitch, which we cut round about the end of July to the middle of August every year, is actually geared to present as many wildflowers as we possibly can. But to get that display, it is dependent upon the grass, which is the matrix in which it grows in, not being too dominant. So we treat it like hay. But the crucial thing is not to cut it at all until all the seeds have set and the foliage has died down, which is somewhere between the middle of July and middle of August. Then cut it and rake it up. Get every little scrap of grass off the ground so it can't die back and then feed back into the soil. But it will make good compost, so we do recycle it in another way. And then we keep it tightly mown for the rest of the summer and into autumn. So we go into winter with very short grass, which means that you can see the first crocuses, they're not competing with grass at all. And that way, we get this rhythm and cycle, all geared around as dramatic and as splendid a display in spring as we possibly can. Now, coming up, Francis visits the gardens of the Horniman Museum in South London, which are being replanted for maximum sustainability.
Botanically, this area seems really, really interesting. How does this fit with the sustainable picture here?
The reality of climate change is hammered home in the fact that we can grow these things in a garden in England, really.
We join a gardener in Kent, who after many years is still finding fresh enthusiasm and joy in her plot.
I think of my garden as a reflection of me. It reflects the kind of personality I am: bubbly, like to laugh a lot, and I like to plant what I love a lot.
We catch up with Adam in his garden to see how it is developing.
It's been a great couple of months. The herbaceous perennial planting is coming out of the ground, and it's given me a real understanding of how to move the garden forward. I'm breaking every single rule I've got for myself. Don't start lots of projects at once. That's exactly what I've done. So I'm going to show you a couple of them today.
And I shall be in the wildlife garden, adding some plants to the pond and doing a bit of cutting back. The poor old orchard beds are feeling the drought. Actually, the hydrangeas, this is Annabelle, are not doing too badly, and these are plants that do like a little bit of moisture. But by and large, it is really showing signs of just not having enough water. However, those shrubs that have finished flowering, and I've got a Philadelphus here, will have new growth that is really good for taking cuttings from, and these are semi-ripe cuttings. So if I take a shoot like this, the tip is very flexible. That's soft, so that would be a softwood cutting. But you don't have to go down very far for it to be flexible, but not bendable. Now, what you do need is a pair of secateurs and a bag. And I know I say this all the time when you take cuttings, but it really is essential. It makes all the difference in the world. If you can have a polythene bag that you can pop the cutting into, straight away, you're increasing the chances of survival. So we can take a nice shoot like that one. You can see here, it's soft at the top, but good and firm underneath. Take it a little bit longer than you intend. So I'm going to go underneath a leaf and cut like that, and straight into a bag. And even if it doesn't completely fit, just keep most of it in the bag. Right, I've got a nice couple there, which I'll take. And this is something you can do with a range of shrubs, from viburnums to lilacs and hydrangeas. it's a good idea to have all the bits and pieces that you think you'll need ready before you take the cutting. Pots, composts, I've got a penknife in my pocket, I've got secateurs, I've got a good growing medium, about 50% perlite. Now I'll take one out at a time. Now this is where a penknife is a lot more useful than a pair of secateurs. Take off the excess leaves and put your glasses on so you can see. Now by excess, the point about the leaves is that they are now losing moisture. However, if you don't have any leaves at all, it means that when you do form roots, there's nothing to feed them. So it's a bit of a trade-off. You want to leave some leaves, which will feed the roots until the roots can generate new foliage, and then you're fine. So, on balance, I like to take off all but the top ones. So you can see here that these are nodes. If you cut beneath a node, that is a good place for roots to form. Pop it in here like this on the corner, push it down. That is in a good place. Let's take another one out. So I'll pop that in there, like that. That's quite a small one. And then we can pop this one in here. Label it, and you're away. So this is a mock orange, Philadelphus. There we go. That should start to show signs of new growth in about 2 to 3 weeks' time, and then they'll be ready to pot on. There is still an urgency involved because it's important to get them watered. And what you need to do is water the compost well. That will relieve the situation. There's no need to overwater them, but if you've got plenty of perlite, in fact, that will drain fairly well. But it is really important that you keep the air around them nice and moist. Now, you can do this by putting a polythene bag over them. You can put them outside in a sheltered place. If we get another burst of really hot weather, you will have to protect them from that. But what is really important is to use a mister and just keep that air fairly damp. Now, a few weeks ago, Francis went to South London to visit a garden attached to a museum, where they, like all of us, are having to cope with the effects of climate change. But rather than seeing this as a difficult challenge, they're taking it as an exciting horticultural opportunity.
Over the last 120 years, the Horniman Museum and its 16 acres of gardens and woodland have been a green oasis for the people of Forest Hill in London. The reason I'm here today is to meet head horticulturist Errol Fernandez. He arrived here at the gardens in April 2021. So have you always been a gardener? I mean, how far back does that love of growing go?
I think I've always been a gardener at heart. My mother was a florist and always encouraged us to grow. She sort of divided up the garden between my siblings and I and would run like little Chelsea flower show competitions and come round and judge.
Seriously?
Yeah, which was really, really great.
Did you always win?
I can't say I always won. I think there was multiple certificates given out to each of us.
Runner-up, you know.
Yeah.
Since his arrival, parts of the garden have been undergoing huge changes, and it's Errol's passion and vision for gardening closely with nature that's driving this space towards a more sustainable future. Botanically, this area seems really, really interesting. How does this fit with the sustainable picture here?
It's a border where we're trying to demonstrate the reality of climate change. So there's an excitement for us as horticulturalists that we can grow many of these things. But there is also, very quickly after that, there's a sense of guilt, really, because it's the reality of climate change is hammered home in the fact that we can grow these things in a garden in England, really.
So you're going more arid, less water, and also more tender, so reduced frosts. Have you had to change the conditions here a lot to get that?
So this mound here, we've gathered bits of concrete and rock and things, and that really creates a really free draining aspect. We've added a bit of grit in, and then there's about 5 centimetres of this gritty mulch over the top.
So it's not a thick layer of gravel at all?
No, it's really, really shallow. I mean, the mulch is going to reflect the sun, which some of these plants are going to enjoy that. It's going to sort of keep some warmth there. But also, I want the dynamic change. I want some of these plants to start seeding around.
Are there any particular species you have here that are favourites or particularly tender that you didn't expect to be able to grow?
There's a grevillea over here and a melaleuca just over here that are particularly tender. Also, the Echium candicans, they can be quite tender.
Adapting and rethinking what is planted is key. The main showpiece here, the sunken garden, has always been very traditional, but this comes at an environmental cost. So this area here is going through clearly a really big change. What's the plan?
It's going to be vastly different to what you see now. So we're moving right away from bedding. We're going to have some trees, small trees, shrubs, and a herbaceous planting throughout. These plants, salvia, the cosmos, the lupins, are going to sort of stud through that. We're trying to maintain a display the whole time. Usually it's planted at great expense and time and cost to the environment. This year we're sowing, and those plants will be allowed to seed, and that's going to create a seed bank within the soil for future years to come, so that will hopefully come up in and amongst the shrubs and the herbaceous plants in the future. Far more sustainable than what we're doing now, really.
Well, clearly, we're going to have to come back in a few years' time and see it fully transformed. Not far away from the sunken garden, there's a bigger and much noisier challenge. So this little area of peace in London is not quite so peaceful here. This is a massive road.
Yeah, it's one of London's busiest roads, the South Circular. And that's one of the reasons why we're planting the microforest here. It's to sort of act as a dense particulate pollution filter against the road, and it will create a nice green corridor for wildlife. And we've planted it with 900 trees, and there's 35 different species, so lots of diversity for wildlife.
So what exactly is a microforest?
The big spacings of trees that we're so used to, it's not natural at all. Trees will grow where the seed falls, and often the trees are very closely packed. And through that dense planting, the trees compete with each other and therefore grow really quickly. So we're making use of that essentially, a quite natural phenomenon. So they're gonna compete, and then you'll get a really dense canopy in sort of as little as 15 to 20 years that would otherwise sort of take, could take up to 100 years.
So how have you gone about actually choosing the species that you're using in the microforest?
So drought tolerance and being able to manage with a reduction in rainfall felt important, but also I think an aesthetic was really important too.
Right.
So we wanted multi-seasonal interest, so we've got things like Amelanchier, they're going to look really lovely with the Larix decidua sort of coming into bloom in the early spring. We got Scots pine and sorbus that's going to be in bloom, and it's also going to produce berries and lovely autumn colour. So it's as much about the sustainability, the ecology and climate change as it is about being beautiful, having some substance.
We've seen just 3 areas of the garden, but there's so much more that will be done. Errol and his team certainly have lots of plans, and I really look forward to seeing how this whole garden evolves over the years.
Well, as well as having what is evidently a fascinating and inspiring garden, The Horniman Museum was recently awarded Museum of the Year by the Arts Fund. So go along and visit garden and museum. Now, this is the wildlife garden, and the whole point of this area of Longmeadow is to try and have as many elements as possible to help wildlife, but also make it a garden, also make it something beautiful. Now, the first thing you've got to have is a pond. A pond is absolutely essential, a key element. And you can see that it's not like many ponds. For example, I've left the duckweed because that's cover. And underneath there, there'll be lots of life. Around the edges, there's a tangle of growth, cover for lots of animals, not just amphibians, but also mammals coming to the water to drink. I've got some plants I want to add to it. This is a little native plant called frogbit. It's like a minute little water lily. It floats on the water, will produce a white flower with a yellow centre, and then in autumn, it dies away completely. But by then it's produced a little bud, and that tiny little bud will sink to the bottom of the pond, and then in spring, that bud will rise to the surface and will create really good cover for dragonfly larvae, young tadpoles, frogs, and little beetles and amphibians. So it's doing good and looking beautiful and really easy to plant. You just plonk it on the water and you buy it in little seemingly insignificant little pieces like this, but it will work perfectly well. Now, the wildlife garden has been really rich with plants and bees and butterflies right up to the end of June. So I'm going to start cutting back, but just at random. Any nettles that are near the front of the border I'll take out, but I'll leave the ones at the back. These cow parsley are now finished. The seeds have dropped, so I can take these back. I shall carefully work through this, not taking out too much, just letting a little bit of light and air in so that the new growth can have every opportunity to come through. And this is the key thing when you're gardening with wildlife, is to just use a light touch. You'll do more harm by doing too much than too little. But at the same time, you do want it to look good and be somewhere that you can enjoy as well as wildlife. Now, let's go and visit one of your gardens.
I'm Diane and welcome to my garden in Stoke-on-Trent. This is my happy place. This small area here belongs to my grandson George, and he's helped me to put these happy little plants in, and he loves to water and spray everything. One of my absolute favourites is my mock orange. This plant has moved all around the garden. She's found her perfect spot. And my lupins this year have given me a wonderful display. This here poppy is my particular favourite. This is the third place that it's lived in my garden. Everywhere else I found it was far too sunny or not enough drainage. But now, 3 years on, and she's flourishing. I hope you've enjoyed this short visit to my little piece of heaven here in Stoke-on-Trent. Bye!
Now, this time of year, the cardoons, which get really top heavy, tend to flop and need tying up. But luckily, we've got a really strong support to tie them to. And if I get that in there and the string doesn't break, that looks better. Now, I have to say, Diane, your Meconopsis made me think of the Meconopsis we had here at Longmeadow with great envy, because I struggle to grow them. I love them. And I think it looks really beautiful. But they're one of those plants that when they're happy, they're fine, they're easy. But unless they get exactly what they want, then inevitably they don't work at all. But yours look great. Now, talking about looking great, what do we think about the 4 pots here in the Jewel Garden? This is the centre of Longmeadow. And at the 4 corners, we have 4 whopping great pots. Now, up till now, These pots have been big statements. We've had bananas growing in them, phormiums, big fuchsias, and lots of dahlias and cannas. But this year I did something different. At the centre of each of these pots, and all four are identical, I've got a miscanthus malpartus. Now, it's quite useful when you're designing a pot of some sort to think of a pillar, a filler, and a spiller. And the miscanthus was intended as the pillar, the thing that would rise up in a tower. Now, you can see it's not rising very much at the moment. Miscanthus are vigorous plants, they're very adaptable, I love them, and this particular one, malpartus, has a beautiful silvery, bronzy flower head. Well, no flower head as yet, but there's time for that to come. The filler is a Nautia. This is Nautia macedonica. And I wanted it to weave through the miscanthus, and that's sort of happening. There is a sedum. That's looking good. I like the richness of the colour, and there's an ipomere, which also has got wonderful colour, but not spilling. I put it in there because it would fall over the pot. As yet, it's remaining resolutely upright. Now, I'm not unhappy with these pots. I like the way they're looking, but I do hope that they fulfil the potential that I wanted from them over the coming weeks, maybe months. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we went down to Kent to visit the garden of someone who is not just a passionate gardener, although she certainly is that, but also, by her own admission, a very competitive one too.
There's always room for something. My husband would say, Violet, but there's no room. I said, don't you worry, I'll find a space for it. I'm sure eventually there won't be any pathway if I have my way, and then I'll just move and start somewhere else. Bye. My name is Violet Crowell. I live with my husband, and we've got this garden. This is a very busy garden. You get this fusion of different plants, but it's because I love my fruit trees. I must have fruits. I love flowers, and everybody have to cohabit. I think of my garden as a reflection of me. It reflects the kind of personality I am. Bubbly, like to laugh a lot, and I like to plant what I love a lot. My love of garden comes from in my 20s when I was living with my extended family in London in the 70s. We lived in a masonette, and we had a balcony, and what we used to do is plant flowers in. We also plant tomatoes and dahlias. I'm a very competitive person, primarily because I do horticulture show and I like to win the cups. I specifically love showing springtime my daffodils, summertime my roses, but my favorite is dahlias. I call this the patio area, and when you come through the door and you see the plants, it just makes you feel happy inside, and you start the day off really feeling good. This plant is almost perfect, but not quite. But they always do well, Mary Jamanda, they always do very well. This one is more place, and this is a pom-pom. It's a small pom-pom, and I like it because it's so sweet. It makes you want to cuddle it. This always do well as well. 2013, I was really, really lucky. I got 13 cups. 13, yep. What they say is, Violet, your name precedes you before they see you. The secret is, in November, I dig them up. I take them to the greenhouse and I put them in sawdust so that they're kept dry. Now, come February, I use seaweed juice. I dilute it and I water that in to get them going. And then come April, May, I plant them up. I also put ash down, so that's their liquor feed. I water them a lot, and then they start to sing to me, I call it. The plants, they speak to me. Every morning I go around and I look at a plant which I think are not doing that well. If a plant see me looking at it too often, they know they're going to be moved. If they don't want to move, they start producing. And that's the only way they stay where they are, or else they'll move. But wherever they move to, they're always happy, because I hate to see the plants suffer. Welcome to our sunken garden. I try to plant things on different level. So you got the canopy and the lower plants underneath. And then you've got the summer bed with the cosmos, which are looking fantastic. We've got some hot lips, which is a salvia. And we have got hydrangea. I try to colour coordinate where possible, but often it happened by accident, just instinct. And because I plant by feeling, if it feels right, it's going to be there. I've got loads of banana tree. Here we've got aces around the pond because it gives that Japanesey feeling. It's a fusion of all kind of plants flowering at different time of the year. This is violet style of planting. I wake up thinking about the garden, and most time I go to bed thinking about the garden. I've got medlar, mulberry. I've got peach, which is on its way out. I've got cherries. I've got the white currant, the red currant, the black currant. Lovely, 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 lovely. Oh, fig. Fig is one of my favorites as well. In this garden, everybody has something. The squirrels, the nuts, the blackbirds, the blackberries. I always say they can have that side, but they always come over this side, which is my side. I do love my vegetable, I must admit. I'm particularly pleased with the kale. They're doing really well. They're looking fantastic. The Sherman cabbages are doing beautiful as well. One day we were going through our cupboards in the kitchen and we came across this black-eyed bean. I think it was a year over sell-by date. And my husband and I said, well, but if we put it in water, would it then start sprouting? Which it did. So I do hope it's got enough sunshine to produce something. That's what gardening is about. You win some and you lose some, innit? That's life. Corn is my favorite vegetable. So I decided I wasn't going to put my eggs in one basket. This year, I've decided to try growing sweet corn in this garden, and they're doing fantastic. They get water a lot. And the ones in the allotment, it doesn't get water that much. So it's an experiment. But these ones at the moment are ahead. I'm a very competitive thing, and I like my plants to be competitive as well. The garden keeps me busy. It keeps me on my toe, and now I say it's my full-time job. I always say, it doesn't matter what problems I've got indoor. When I hit the garden, it will disappear. I'm not saying when I go in, it won't return, but when I'm in the garden, all I think about is plants. So that's what the garden is, and I would not do without it.
Now, you can visit Violet's garden because she is part of the National Garden Scheme. And if you go to their website, it'll give you the times and dates when her garden is open and, of course, all others local to you. And I do recommend using it because it can be inspirational as well as really good fun. Now, I'm clutching a bowl of washing up water, grey water, because in the very dry conditions we've had, you need to use whatever water you can. And grey water, whether it's for washing dishes or yourself, is perfectly good on floral plants. So don't use it on edible food. Let it cool down, of course. And I've got it here for this clematis. This is Clematis Prince Charles that I planted a couple of months ago. It's doing fine. It's flowering well, and that's wonderful. But because it's a young plant, it means that its root system is fairly small, so therefore it's not able to access the moisture that might be deeper down in the soil. So I'm having to make sure it is really well watered. And clematis is one of those plants that really needs water. So grey water is perfect for them. So I'll just put that on. Now, still to come on today's programme. We join Adam as he continues to take stock on what further changes need to be made. And as part of our series of films celebrating the Queen's Green canopy, we meet someone who is a self-confessed ginkgophile.
For me, it's just become an obsession almost. There is a cultivar that will virtually suit every condition.
But before that, we're paying a visit to one of your gardens. And actually, this one is just up the road from here.
Hello, Gardener's World. My name is Sally Maddox. I'm a retired midwife and I live in a small village outside Shrewsbury, or is it Shrewsbury? 12 years ago, when we moved into this house, this garden was very dark and dismal. It just had a patch of grass and was bare walls with lots of ivy. So we decided to make it into a rose garden. So this end wall is north facing, so it's always in the shade. It's just underplanted with ferns and hostas. Being from Shrewsbury, we have to have Charles Darwin in the garden, named after his hometown. This rose is Claire Austin. She's a prolific flowerer, but she does get a bit unruly and untidy at times. Hello, Woody. This is a particular favourite of mine. This is Creme de la Creme climbing rose. It has the most enormous blooms and a very delicate scent. And then always plenty to pick in the garden. So here's a small posy. Thank you, Gardener's World. Bye-bye.
Well, like Sally, I've got the Charles Darwin rose, and it's a really good one. Absolutely lovely. Now, these are rose cuttings, which I took last October. These were hardwood cuttings, which are very easy to take and need no special conditions. You just put them in a slit with a bit of grit in the soil and leave them, and if they're going to take, they normally will come through the following spring. Now, these have done very well. You can see there's really good growth on these, but they're about to be swamped by the squashes, so I want to pot them up. Now, let's have a look at that. You see, there we are. Really quite small roots on that. So that's not ready to be planted out. So I've prepared some pots and some compost. Okay, there we go. I will grow this on all through this winter and next summer, and I would expect this to be in a good state to plant out in the autumn of next year, when it should have a really good root system. Right, let's put that like that. And what I am going to do is just prune that back a little bit, because what I'm interested in growing is not the top growth, but the roots. If you've got strong roots, everything else will follow. I'm going to cut this right back. There and there. And that will grow perfectly strongly. Right, I'm going to do the rest and take them out. However, it's time to pay another visit to Adam in his garden and, quite frankly, see what he's been up to.
It's been a great couple of months. The garden now is really starting to reveal itself. What I mean by that is a lot of the herbaceous perennial planting is coming out of the ground, and it's given me a real understanding of how to move the garden forward. I'm breaking every single rule I've got for myself. Don't start lots of projects at once. That's exactly what I've done. So I'm going to show you a couple of them today. Last time you were here, I was planting a new shady bed right by the house. I've added a couple of plants since, and this Disporum is the final tweak. It's a great plant for shade and sits really well in a woodland border. I'm really happy with how this is growing, and there's loads of detail in here to look at, but I'm still tinkering and adjusting. I think sometimes when we plant a border, we instantly think it's got to be perfect. Oh, in reality, it hasn't. If you get those shrubs and the trees in the right place, when it comes to herbaceous perennial planting, you can keep chopping and changing. In the middle there was a lot of stuff that had self-seeded that I inherited, and once it had stopped flowering, it looked like a bulk. So what I mean by that is between those two Taxus domes there was no real flow of movement. So what I've done is I've put that Disporum in and the Epimedium down here. They flower earlier on in the year, so it's not about the flower at the moment, but look at the different leaf shapes. And they bring these wonderful forms. And for me, that's a lot of how you put the borders together, not worrying too much about the flower. I also put in this rose, Shropshire Lass, to help cover the wall. It's growing well and needs tying in. I think sometimes when we plant roses, we let them get away and get too far on and then start to sort of try and form them back into the shape we want. So what I've done is I've tried to fan some of the growth out, but I want to create a column up here. I've been quite harsh with the first pruning. I've cut out a couple of really strong stems. I've done that because these stems were really going in the wrong direction. But I've chose stems that are going in the right direction to start with. And over the last couple of months, as it's been growing, just tying it in, I'm just creating this tiny little figure of eights and tie it around my cable to start with, like that. And then tie that around the rose. That will stop the rose as it grows rubbing against that wire. And so I'm probably doing that every 3 or 4 weeks at the moment. The back garden's north facing, so I thought the challenge might be too much shade. But actually, the big problem is that it's just not cosy enough. Because of these terracings, what's happening is it's lifting the garden up, so it's getting the light earlier on in the day, but also it's leaving me with areas that are feeling very open. You come through the gate and you see the whole garden. There's no mystery or surprise. And I think now I've just about got my head around how I want each space to feel. There's basically 3 layers of terracing, so I'll start at the top. Here, greenhouse in the corner, hedges doing all right. We give them a hard prune and a really good feed, and it's starting to develop. When we look across here, we've got a lovely gas tank in there. I want that to be a woodland, but how do I hide that gas tank? I think what I'm going to do is start to undulate that ground so you can still get in there, feel it, the practicalities, but from here, it will be hidden. And then come over here. So when we come over here, this is a little bit, when you're deciding where to sit in your garden or maybe add a terrace or something, maybe just put a couple of chairs there first and work out how it feels or how you want it to feel. Here, you've got these 2 cornice mats which frame the chimneys beautifully, but also they make you feel really comfortable. I can sit and enjoy my woodland, and then here in front of me is going to be a gravel garden. Yes, I do love a gravel garden. I really want to push the plant in here. These terraces are so free draining. I want to find out what I can get away with. But the middle terrace below is where I've started a new project. This area has a lot of lawn and the potential to build in more cosy spaces and the odd surprise. Right now, the main seating area by the house is very exposed. But by widening this border above, it will give me more space for further planting, privacy, and more surprises. So once I've got that aligned and nicely planted, lovely deep border, if I come back in here, the moment I squat down, dapple shade, the atmosphere feels different. But you can see right into the area, so my idea is to plant it probably from more or less here. So you'll go along the path and you'll cut your way in. So in here, you'll be sat back down. I'm going to set the tone for you. Mrs. Frost and I, the sun's going down over the tree. We're enjoying a nice glass of something. And I think, you know, we can do that in our gardens, is look for those areas where the sun goes down, where the sun comes up, where it's cosy, where it's more exposed, and then really try and work and get the most out of those areas. I've started working on some of the borders here, and this one I'm beginning to plant up with shrubs and perennials that will soften the terrace lines and bring cohesion to the garden. So actually, the interesting thing is, once I've told you to divide all these spaces up, you've then got to find some subtle way of connecting them back together. And I'm very much doing that through planting. So here, what I'm doing in this border is using this Baptisia australis, which will get to probably just shy of a metre, lovely grey foliage, works really good as a sub-shrub, lupin light blue flower with a deep black seed pod. I'm using that as the base plant here, and then the Veronicastrum, which is this strong sort of spikes, I'm using that to work against this plant, but also to repeat further along the border. But the key is, how do we connect with what's up there? What I'm using are grasses. This is panicum with a couple of Molinia right alongside. They will help connect the terraces and add subtle differences in forms and leaf shapes. These now also give me the opportunity to add some rhythm, repetition on the next layer of the garden. So these grasses in my garden are going to become key plants of putting the whole thing together, like a jigsaw, really. Anyway, I can hear these shouting. They want a drink. So do I.
It's fascinating to see the changes that Adam's making, and I think it looks great, it looks wonderful. And we shall be going back to see further changes in a few weeks' time. Now, I'm filling this set of plugs ready for sowing my own favourite winter salads. Now, winter salad leaves are very different from summer ones. For example, there's not a lettuce in them. I do grow some winter lettuce, but this particular mix is based on oriental greens, although there are others in there too. I've got rocket, and I've got Mitsuna, and I've got actually a new rocket on me, which is a red-veined rocket. That also looks really good on the plate. And then we've got mustard. And what I do is sow them individually and plant them individually, but when I harvest them, I mix and match. You can buy mixtures of seed. The downside of that is it's a bit like getting leftovers and mixing them all together in a soup. Sometimes it'd be quite nice, sometimes not so. Whereas with this, you can be very discriminating, and every time you harvest, you make your own mixture. So a little bit more of this, a bit less of that, see what's growing well. And I assure you, it can be as delicious as any salad you ever have. Now, I'm sowing it in these plugs, which means putting more than one seed in a plug. Now, in principle, I'm not mad about doing that, but just drop a tiny little smattering, no more than 3 or 4 seeds at most. And if it looks crowded, I can thin them out. And if you can give them a bit of protection, a cloche or a fleece, or sometimes in a greenhouse, they will be strong. They will take any amount. They don't need extra heating. They're all hardy, and they will give you good salads every single day across the winter months. I've got a few seeds left over. Now, I will repeat this process with all the rest of these seeds. I have a really nice selection to plant out in about 5-6 weeks' time, and then start harvesting in autumn. But it's time now to visit another of your gardens, and it takes us to the outskirts of Manchester.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Natalie from Seoul. I grew up in China, where I had no knowledge of gardening at all. I came to England and married to David 30 years ago. I noticed that British gardens were so beautiful, and I was inspired to learn more about it. We moved into this newly built house 28 years ago. The garden was bare, almost nothing. And I started collecting the plants. Every plant in my garden has got a story to tell. These are Calla Ethiopica. They are gorgeous at the moment. We call calla lilies. They present purity, hope, eternity, and peace.
Our garden is facing the west. We are very lucky to watch the sun going down.
Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you very much indeed, Natalie. And thanks for sharing your garden with us. These are cordon gooseberries, which are now due for their annual prune. Gooseberries produce their fruit, rather like apples and pears, on spurs, and they take a few years to form. Now, this new growth won't bear any fruit next year, and maybe not the year after that, because it needs to develop spurs like fruit. And you can see the old shoots that you have there, that's where the fruit comes from, clustered along the stem of the plant. And by the time this has developed fruiting wood, it'll be right out here and you've lost the shape of your cordon completely. So I need to cut all of that back just above the old wood. So I cut that there like that. Now, the only time I would leave any new growth is if I wanted to train some in. So if, for example, I wanted this shoot to go on up there, I would leave that, and then as it grew, I'd tie it in. But I've got all the growth I need. I want to keep them small. And the point about cordons, whether it's gooseberries or anything else, is you get a mass of fruit in a very small space. I've got 12 gooseberry plants along here. It's a very efficient way of producing fruit, and they were good this year too. Now, over the last few weeks, we have been celebrating the Queen's Jubilee with films about people who are passionate about trees as part of the Queen's Green Canopy. And we're showing 7, 1 for each of the decades of Her Majesty's reign. This week, it takes us to Worcestershire.
Ginkgo biloba is probably the oldest plant in the world. In their current form, they're probably around 65 million years old. They were certainly around with the dinosaurs. My name is Tony Davies, and I am the national collection holder of Ginkgo biloba and the cultivars of Ginkgo biloba. And it's probably the largest collection now in the world. My front garden's a kind of conventional garden with a lawn and some nice beds around it. Originally, the back garden was a lawn, and then when I started collecting ginkgo, I needed more space. We have 288 distinct cultivars of Ginkgo biloba, but altogether, I guess, when you add all of the young plants up as well, we've probably got 2,000 to 3,000. There isn't a great deal of room left now. For me, ginkgo has just been fascinating. They're incredibly diverse. We have very interesting patterns on leaves. We have fastigiate ones, we have weeping ones, we have prostrate ones that would crawl across the ground. And for me, it's just become an obsession almost. Friends sometimes describe me as an anorak, but I think there's a little bit more to it than that. I think ginkgophiles appreciate the diversity of the plant and how adaptable it's become to produce these really new and interesting cultivars. This plant here is Ginkgo biloba freak. Freak is peculiar because it contains 3 sets of chromosomes, and that gives rise to a thickened leaf and an unusual leaf shape. Only a mother would love this one, and I love it. There are some really classy dwarf ginkgos, one of which is Troll. Troll is a Dutch cultivar, and it looks absolutely marvellous when it's covered with a light spray of water and the water's glistening in the sunshine. Dwarf ginkgos are basically ginkgos that grow less than 2 metres high or 2 metres spread in 10 years. This particular plant here is called Ginkgo biloba baldii, and it's been grafted at this point here to form a standard. And it produces a really nice balanced head, and a number of the dwarf cultivars can also be grafted onto stems of Ginkgo biloba to form standard plants. I've got a beautiful weeping cultivar, Ginkgo biloba pendula, with pendulous branches that will eventually touch the ground. In the collection, we have around 26 variegated cultivars. There's a couple that are really nice, like Sunstream and California Sunset, with its lobed, serrated leaves. With the variegated ginkgos, the best thing is to give them a position so that they're in dappled light or partial shade. That stops some of the delicate variegated foliage from becoming scorched. In the autumn, Ginkgo biloba has this amazing ability to turn a rich butter yellow, and the leaves hang on the trees for a few days, and then all of a sudden they virtually drop all in one go, and there'll be this amazing carpet of leaves on the ground. All ginkgos go this lovely colour, so it's a bonus for whichever one takes your fancy. I have in the collection a plant called Ginkgo biloba survivor, the ginkgos that were growing in Hiroshima. During the end of the Second World War, the atomic bomb was dropped there, and these trees were absolutely flattened and devastated, but eventually came back to life. I think a plant that can survive nuclear fission has got to be one of the most amazing things in the world. I think everybody should have a ginkgo in their garden. There is a cultivar that will virtually suit every condition. You can have a ginkgo even in a fairly tight space. If you've got no soil to plant one in, you can even grow it in a container. So there really is no excuse not to have a ginkgo in your garden.
Well, Tony may be right that every garden could have a ginkgo. And as it happens, I've got a ginkgo, and I've had one for about 3 years now, but I've never found the right place to put it. You want to find somewhere where you can appreciate it as a specimen. And so I put it in a pot, but it's now due for repotting. And the great thing about ginkgos is that they are very adaptable. They'll grow in a pot, they'll grow in acidic soil, in alkaline soil, in full sun, in part shade. They are really easy to grow. So I've got this in a pot here, which I think is pretty root bound. I haven't tried to take it out, but we'll see if I can. It's one of these things that, there we go, it is coming. There it is. There we go. Oh, not too bad. Oh, that's pretty good. You can see there are the roots. There's a little bit of compost in there. Now I'll pop that on the ground. And I've got a pot just the next size up. I've got a very basic compost. This is our normal coir-based compost, a little bit of perlite in it, a touch of garden compost. But as I say, these are very adaptable trees. Just any peat-free compost will do fine. So I'll put some in the bottom to sit on. And then pop that in. And then fill in around it. And you can see that there's just about an inch or so around the outside for the roots to grow into, and that'll be fine, and that will keep it happy for at least another year or even two, and then I can pot it on again. While I'm doing this, here's some jobs you can do this weekend. Hardy annuals, like cornflowers, sorinthy or marigolds, are normally sown in spring. But if you sow some now and plant out the young plants early next spring, you can bring forward the flowering season by up to a month. Scatter the seed on a seed tray, cover them lightly. They don't need a greenhouse in order to germinate, just put them somewhere sheltered, and then the seedlings should emerge in a few weeks' time. It's easy to create new strawberry plants by pinning down runners. Each runner has a series of young plants or plantlets, and with a homemade staple you can either pin these to the soil so they root into it, or into a little pot of compost. And then, in about a month's time, when the roots are firmly established, simply cut them free from the parent plant and you have your new strawberries. If you have garlic or onions or shallots that you've dried, they need preparing for storage. Cut off any foliage or stems, remove any loose outer leaves to the bulb and tidy up the roots, but don't cut off the root plate, as that will harm storage. And then, if you put them loosely in a basket and keep that in a cool, dark place, you'll find that they will store well for months. You may wonder why I'm walking around with a patty inside my shirt. It's because she decided it was comfortable in there, and it's a lot easier than carrying her. And if I put her down, she'll run away. So there she stayed for a bit. You comfy? That's good. What we have now in the jewel garden is all the rich colours, ranging from the bright yellows of the Rudbeckias, the sunflowers, like Velvet Queen, Red Sunset, which can be almost brown. These russets and marmalades and oranges and purples and fiery reds are dominating the jewel garden from now until it all starts to fade away towards the middle and end of September. But we've got a long time before that happens. Let's enjoy the intensity while it lasts. But I'm afraid that's it. We've run out of time. However, I will see you back here at Longmeadow at 8:30 next Friday. So until then, bye-bye.